up, guys? This is Drew from ASIM Gaming, back to do another Unity C# tutorial. Where we last left off, I talked about variables and the four main types of int, double, string, and bool, and then a whole bunch of other types that you probably haven't heard of or probably will never use. But anyways, today's tutorial is going to be about operators. So now that we have variables, we want to actually do stuff with those variables, and that's where operators come in. There are very many different types of operators. You're probably not going to use even half of them. But I'll put a link in the description, probably giving a full list, which will include the ones we'll talk about today. But today we're just going to go about there'll be a couple you probably haven't used, but for the most part, you've probably used these before, even dating back in preschool. Before I do get started scripting, I just want to make sure I've created an operator script with the C#. Make sure you attach it to a game object in the scene, or it'll give you a big headache of why it's not printing to the console, because I'm going to print to the console a lot of times during this tutorial. So just make sure you attach your script to this. It can be an empty game object, doesn't really matter. But I didn't do that the first time, and it just really frustrated me. But anyways, let's get started scripting now that I have that disclaimer. So the first thing we're going to talk about today, you've probably learned since grade school, or preschool even, is called give me a little space here, additive operators. And that is going to be your plus and minus. And the reason it's called additive and there's not a subtractive or whatever for negative is because realistically when you're adding, especially if you've taken any digital electronics courses, is when you get into the bits, you're really just adding more, which causes it to go over to negative. But don't worry about that. It's just additive for both. But anyways, we're going to define a couple variables, and give me some more space. And you can define variables before you actually use your starter update function, just like JavaScript. But we're going to say int, and I'm going to say w just because x and y are giving me huge headaches. And int w is going to equal 5. And then I'm going to create another variable called, let's go L, and that's going to be equal to 9. And then I'm going to also create a third variable called, let's call it K. Hopefully that, yeah, there we go. And K, and I'm just going to leave that one blank. That's what everything's going to be equal to. So what an additive does is it takes 2, and I'm actually going to cut this and put it in my start function. It takes 2 variables and adds them together. So for instance, let me do something real quick. So additive, w plus L, and then actually I need to set that equals something so I can hold it. We're going to say k equals w plus, and I'm just messing up, w plus L. And then also right afterwards I'm going to say debug.log k. And if you haven't watched the previous tutorials, debug.log is just going to print whatever's in the parentheses to the console. So let's go ahead and go back, and actually let's do the -2 as well. So we'll also say, we'll do a fourth variable, int s, and we'll say s is equal to w minus, or let's say L minus W. Okay, and again, with you learned in the last tutorial, variables have a scope that they can only use of numbers. So make sure that whenever you're doing algorithms like this, it falls into place between that. And we're just going to say debug.log s. Alright, so let's go to our console when we play our game and see what prints out. So go ahead and click play. Again, it's not going to do anything in the scene, but we have 14 as our first one and 4. So if we go back and look at our script, 5 plus 9 is 14, and 9 minus 5 is 4. So it added and it subtracted. So pretty basic. You probably learned, like I said before, you probably learned that in grade school. So not too much new. And I'm just going to turn these into comments because I'm going to use some new ones. I want to be able to use those 2 variables, and actually I will be able to use them. But so let's go back here, And actually, I'm not going to turn those into comments because they're going to get replaced anyways. So the next thing I want to talk about is going to be multiplication. And again, probably back in grade school. And I'm going to say multiplicative. And that's going to be your multiply, your asterisk is multiplies, divides the forward slash, and a new one that you maybe have heard of but probably haven't ever used is, I believe it's called a modulus, but a lot of times it's referred to as the remainder operator. And to actually do this, I'm going to create another variable called t. Okay, so with the first one, we're going to say k equals w asterisk l, and you're going to see that's going to multiply it. So, and then debug.log k. And then the next one is going to be division, and you're going to see what happens with ints in a second. But we're going to say s equals l divided by, not question mark, w. Okay, and then debug.log s. And then the third one, we're going to say t equals the same thing, l modulus w. Okay, and then debug.log t. Alright, so let's go back to our console. And we turn these into comments, so it's not going to do those ones. And it's going to reset what they're equal to, hopefully. So let's go ahead and play. So the first one came out to be 45, and then the second one came out to be 1, and the third one came out to be 4. So if you notice, w times l is 9 times 5 is 45, and then the second one is going to be a bit confusing. L divided by w equals 1. Now, you're probably saying, how does that equal 1? That equals 9 divided by 4 is what, 2.25, I think? But that's not what you got. And that's because you're using an int type. If you were to use a double type, you would get 2.25. But because you're using an integer type, you're actually only going to get whatever it rounds down to. So it's going to cut off your remainder. So it's actually just 1. Or 9 divided by 5. So I don't know why I said 4. So it'd actually be a different. And then the third one, you got 4, which if you divide 9 by 5, you're going to get 1.8. So you're going to, it's a remainder, it's going to give you the remainder of those two divided. And L divided by W, so 9 divided by 5. So yeah, those are the three it's a hard word to say, multiplicative. I probably spelled it wrong. Functions. So those are very useful as well. So the next ones I'm going to talk about are called equality. And that's just going to say, so when we learned about if statements, don't worry about what it means right now, but if I were to say if x is equal to y, that would be, y is not a good one, is equal to y. That's equality. So let me actually give you a comment so I can explain this as I'm showing you. So equality is going to be equals equals and not equal. So the first one I have there, if x equals y, is going to run what's in the if statement, and we'll learn about that later, so don't worry about that if you don't know what that is now. If the x value is exactly equal to the y value, and the exclamation point with the equal sign is saying if x, we'll say, is not equal to y. So what that is saying is if x is not equal to y, then you can run with whatever is in the if statement. So that's equality. The next one I'm going to talk about is called relational. And that is going to be x is greater than y, x is less than y, x is greater than or equal to y, and x is or less than equal to y and greater than equal to y, whichever order you prefer. And I'm just going to do two. So what the first one's saying is if x is greater than y, run whatever in the if statement. So basically, it'll run whatever is in the if statement if your x value is greater than your y value. What the equals to one is saying is if x is greater than or equal to y, then run whatever's in the if statement. So the first one is saying it cannot be equal to. If it's equal to, it's still false. The second one is saying even if it's equal to, it's true. Okay? So the next one I want to talk about is called conditional. And there's logical and or, and then there's conditional, but don't worry for now what logical is. Conditional is more important. So what conditional and an or are, you've probably seen it, is saying if x and y are equal to, and I'm going to put parentheses around the parentheses just to make sure, equal to 0, then run whatever is in this if statement. So basically what this is saying is if both x and y are 0, then you can run whatever is in the if statement. If one of the two is not, then it doesn't work and it's false. So what an or statement says is if x or y are equal to 0, then run whatever's in the if statement. So either one of them can be 0 and the if statement will be true. So again, we'll get into more of that when we get into if statements. Right now, it's probably not as important. So the second to, well, I guess pretty much the last thing I'm going to talk about is called primary operators. And again, these are just some of them. There's a lot more that I'm not going to go over that you probably won't use as much. So the first one you've probably seen before is, and these are primary, so let me put that there. The first one we're going to go over is x dot y. So what x dot y, and I'm going to put dot, is saying is you've seen before where we access different scripts. So for instance, the class, we have a variable operators, and then and it will say we'll take the variable w from it. So another script could say go to the operators class and then access the w variable from that. So you can access, and that's of course only if they're public. If they're private, you can't access from different classes or different scripts, but if they're public, you can. So that's what the dot is. Then we have our parentheses, close parentheses, or just parentheses, and those do order of operations. So like I did with the and statement, if you have something like x plus y times z equals L, then it's going to do x plus y and then multiply it by z, which is different than if I were to say x plus y times z equals L. It's actually going to multiply y times z first because there's a certain order of operations, and I'm not going to go over it this episode, but maybe another one, that you do when you do expressions. And so, again, the link in the description is going to explain that too a little bit. I'm not going to go over that right now. But that's what the parenthesis can do in that sense. Another use that it has is that it will convert types, so type conversion. So for instance, if you have an int, and let me do this, int x is equal to 0, and you want to convert it to something else such as a string, you're going to say string y is equal to int x, I believe. Not 100% sure, but it's used for converting int x. It's used for converting types of variables. So you're going to use that a lot, actually, probably when you're designing games, especially if you're doing especially if you're wanting to take names of things and turn them into numbers, is probably the biggest use for it. And then this last one is to invoke methods. And when we get into functions soon, this will make more sense. But when you have like function, my function, and then you have a closed set of parentheses before the braces, that's just saying you have you can put arguments into that function, which will go through into your function when you call it. But again, that probably didn't make any sense what I just said. But when we actually get into functions, it'll make a lot more sense. Okay, so that's parentheses. The last one that not last one. There's a couple more. Excuse me, a couple more. Is brackets. And brackets are used with arrays. And again, when we get into arrays, you'll see that. So you'll have my array, and I don't know if I'm using the correct form, C#, but just bear with me. So you have an array called my array, and not braces, but you're gonna say 5, and that's gonna, or just like that, and that's gonna constitute your array. So you can access values from that. Another way you can use brackets is for hash tables, and again, that's kind of a more advanced topic that we're not going to get into. And the third way is to index pointers, basically, or get the index from a pointer. But again, you're not going to worry about that. Okay, and the last thing that you probably seem to use a lot is called an incrementer, or prefix pre-increment or post-incrementer. So you have your pre-increment as x++. So you'll use that a lot, especially when you're doing for statements, which we'll get into that later. But when you do x++, you're just going to basically take your variable, so x, and then you're going to add 1. So the equivalent thing would be saying x equals x plus 1 is the same thing basically, but it's a little different because you have post increment or pre-increment, which actually does it before and then gives you the value, and then this is a post increment, which is going to give you the value after. And then of course with x++ you also have x minus minus, which is going to say x equals x minus 1 basically. So that is the basics of operators. Of course, I'm going to give you the link in the descriptions to many more that you probably won't use as much, especially if you're starting out. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe. I'm going to come out with a whole bunch of videos today, hopefully. This is going to be a C# series, so we're just going to go through slowly and make sure everyone understands what to expect with C#. I know it seems like a big daunting task, and in a sense it's a little bit for beginners, but it can be done, especially if you have JavaScript or different programming. It can be done. But thank you for watching.